And also, on your point about Netanyahu, is he even a religious person?
Good question. Is Netanyahu a religious person? Or what about the establishment in Israel? The ruling establishment in Israel, are they religious people? Absolutely not. How can you be a religious person and do these kind of crimes or commit these kind of crimes? So are these Zionists religious people? They're not. They can't be religious people. They try to claim Judaism for themselves, but Jewish rabbis repeatedly disown them. Jewish rabbis clarify, just like the Muslim ulama clarify, when there's a crime committed in the name of Islam, Muslim ulama come out and they condemn those actions. And they say, look, these actions not in our name, not in the name of our religion. Likewise, there are Jewish rabbis around the world, they are condemning Zionism and the Zionists and the IDF and Netanyahu and his entourage. These people, some of them are atheists. They don't even believe in God. They believe in the promise of God for some reason, okay? I mean, when you ask these Zionists, some of them who are atheists, do you believe in God? No, we don't. Do you believe in His promise? Yes, we do. Okay, so it doesn't make sense. It's ironic. They always claim right over this land because in the Bible, we have been promised this land. Okay, this is such an absurd argument. It's unbelievable.
Hi, you know me by the name Nas, but my real name is Nosair Yassin, which is a Muslim name. I'm Muslim, my dad is Muslim, my mom is Muslim, and we've been Muslim for hundreds of years. But one day I decided to take a DNA test just to see where I'm from, for fun. And when I got my results, I was surprised. Turns out I'm Jewish. Specifically, 1% of my DNA comes from a European Jewish descent. The rest come from Greek, Italian, Middle East, Georgian, Nigerian, and so on and so forth. That's not my family tree. That's just science.
By that virtue, all Western countries have to evacuate. Okay, all major. The US has to be evacuated. It has to be given back to the Native Americans. Australia has to be given back to the Aborigines. And Canadian First Nations, they must claim back their country from the Canadians. And South African, look, there are so many examples. This idea is so absurd. It's unbelievable that you have a verse in the Bible that was possibly put down 2,000 years ago for a different people. They weren't the same people. Didn't follow the same culture. Their religion was different. I can challenge any scholar of Judaism on the planet that their religion was different. They were a different people, okay, who were promises. And the promise was made to the seed of Abraham. To the seed of Abraham. That means Ishmael and Ishaq. Both the father of the Israelites and the father of the Arabs. So the Arabs have as much right over this land as do the Israelites if they want to use that passage in the Bible. Okay, so they are not religious people. They don't care about religion. They don't care about laws. They don't care about moral values. They don't care about decent ideas. They don't care about these things. If they did, they wouldn't be firing rockets into civilian buildings, killing thousands of children. The Israelites found themselves to be in a very difficult situation, okay, throughout the history. When did they get respite? When did they feel a sense of ease and comfort and protection? When Islam came to power. Allahu Akbar. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't have an idea. You know, this recent Zionist propaganda, has given this impression to the world that Muslims are inherently anti-Jewish. And because that is the case, we need a state for ourselves to protect ourselves. We need nuclear weapons, we need jets, we need weapons, we need technology to keep all these barbaric, bloodthirsty Arabs at bay. Okay, because if we don't have these things, they will come and eat us alive. They will destroy us. But there is no reality to it. Zionists, this is why I believe Zionists are not only a bunch of liars, they are spin doctors and they are manipulative, malicious propagandists. Okay, I'm using these terms very responsibly, okay, because I have reasons to say these things. Who protected the Jewish people? Who gave refuge to the Jewish people? I would like to quote one particular passage from an academic, an expert of Jewish history from Chicago. And what is his name? His name is Dean Philip Bell. Dean Philip Bell is I can quote so many authorities, so many Jewish rabbis who pay lavish tributes to the Muslim civilization for protecting them, for giving them refuge, for giving them breathing space. You know, the best Jewish scholars, the best Jewish historians, the best Jewish intellectuals, theologians, rabbis, poets, politicians, generals, prime ministers, physicians, you name it. And the list goes on. Scholars, academics, translators, book producers, philosophers. Best Jewish intellectual element was born during the Muslim period. In Spain, in the Middle East, and even as far as Central Asia. The Jewish people found refuge under the rule of Islam for over 1,000 years. Jews lived under the protection of Islam throughout the Middle Ages, throughout the medieval period, which is like 1,000 years. And he's saying this was the golden age of the Jewish people. This is when the best Jewish scholars and luminaries were produced, including people like Musa bin Maimonides. Okay, he's known as Maimonides. He's known as the second Moses in Jewish history. So important is this man that he's known as the second Moses. Who's the first Moses? The Prophet Moses, right? Who is the second Moses? Musa bin Maimun, born in Qartaba in the 12th century, died in Egypt in the 13th century. He died in the year 1204 in Egypt under the Ayyubid rule. He was the private physician to the Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. Musa bin Maimun, a Jewish physician, was the private physician of the Sultan. Okay, and we have poets like Judah Halevi, born in the Muslim lands in Spain. We had Samuel Hanagit, okay, who was a prime minister. Hasda ibn Shaprut, the prime minister to the most powerful Muslim king in the history of Western Europe. Abdurrahman III, the Caliph, the Umayyad Caliph, ruling from Cordoba, from the city of Cordoba in Spain. His prime minister was a Jewish man called Hasda ibn Shaprut. Is this a profile of oppressed people, suppressed people, persecuted people, marginalized people? Absolutely not. So Zionists are liars. They lie to the world. So if the Muslims had this anti-Jewish policy, the Zionists are claiming, if the Arabs wanted to commit a genocide against the Jewish people, they could have done it when they had the strongest armies in the world. The Ayyubids could have done it. The Mamelukes could have done it. The Umayyads in Spain could have done it. The Abbasids could have done it in Baghdad. The oldest Jewish community in the world was in Iraq. Since the Babylonian exile, some Israelite rabbis and scholars and communities remained in Iraq, and they remained even in the Muslim period, and they remained there until 1930s, until the State of Israel was created.
There is this false narrative that, unlike in Europe, Jews enjoyed the same rights as Muslims in Muslim countries, and that until the rise of Zionism, Jews were able to lead peaceful, happy lives in Muslim countries. That is a lie. I mean, it was better for Jews in Muslim countries than in occupied Poland in 1943, but that isn't exactly setting the bar high. The Jews were never seen as equal to Muslims in Muslim countries, not before colonial times and not after, not before the rise of Zionism and not after, not before the State of Israel was established, and definitely not after. Was it all horrible? No, and I will get to that shortly. Some of you are not going to like what I'm about to say and will probably accuse me of Zionist propaganda. So I would like to start off with two comments. First of all, let's look at the numbers of Jews in Muslim countries. In the 1940s, in Libya, there were 35,000 Jews, and today there are 0. In Egypt, there were 85,000, and today there are 3. In Tunisia, there were 100,000. Today there are 1,500. I could move on to Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, but again, you get the picture. All of these Jewish communities have been completely destroyed or almost completely destroyed. And when the numbers are so dramatic as this, it does tell us something. It's not something that should just be ignored. Communities don't just disappear if they are having a great time. In non-Muslim countries like the US, France, and Canada, there were Zionist and Zionist activity, and a large part of these communities stayed. Immigration is hard. You only resort to it when the situation is unbearable or when you think that it will soon become unbearable. And my second comment, if you are not convinced by the numbers of Jews I just mentioned, then tell me this. Can you name one minority in any Muslim country that is thriving? From Morocco in the west to Iran in the east, from Turkey in the north to Yemen in the south, the number of Coptic Christians in Egypt is decreasing. Christians in Iraq are disappearing, with 2 million having left in recent years. Iran is the home to many oppressed groups that no one cares about, the Baha'i, the Ratostras, the Balak people. I know you have probably never heard of them. Independent women aren't having a good time in Iran either. Then there are the Kurds, a Muslim nation who are fighting for independence but being oppressed by other Muslims. No one is getting out onto the streets for them, by the way. And there are Hindus who are suffering terribly in all Muslim countries. There used to be millions of Hindus in Muslim countries. They are disappearing. They get zero media coverage. I started this video by talking about the Farhud, and the thumbnail of this video is also taken from the Farhud program. I'm focusing on it for two reasons. The Farhud was the largest pogroms against the Jews in terms of the number of deaths. Terrible things were done to the Jews, and many women were the R-word, which is actually just pure evil and violence. So hundreds of Jewish women were subjected to the R-word. The reason I chose this specific photo is that it doesn't show 1 or 10 or even 100 Arabs. You can see hundreds of Arabs armed with knives and cheering on their way to kill Jews. The Arab women were cheering too. There has never been any incident involving gangs of Jews or Israelis storming into an Arab village population and killing Arab children and subjecting Arab women to the R-word? Never. Even after the Yom Kippur War or the suicide bombers, never has the Jewish mob done anything like it. Never. The Muslims, on the other hand, have done it, and they are still doing it to Jews and other minorities. In Hebrew, we refer to the Jewish community in Iraq as the Babylonian Jews, as the Jews in Iraq were there from the times of the great empires of the East, more than 1,000 years before the establishment of Islam. So there were 150,000 Babylonian Jews 80 years ago. Today there are about 4 Jews left in Baghdad. Yemenite Jews experience hardships that was either very bad or catastrophic. They had suffered under Muslim rule for hundreds of years and been exposed to a series of anti-Jewish laws, one of which was that orphaned children had to be Muslimized. This was one of the reasons why the Jews of Yemen got engaged and married at a very young age, so that if the parents died, the kid would already be part of another family. This fact also explains why half of the Yemenite Jews had already migrated to Israel before 1948, before the creation of Israel. One of the waves of immigration of Yemenite Jews to Israel took place in 1882, the same year that the first wave of Jews came from Europe in modern times. As an Israeli, I've been accused of colonialism about 400,000 times. Never mind the fact that there has never been a Jewish colonial empire in Europe like that of the British or the French, but most of the Jews in Israel today, and indeed 150 years ago, came from Muslim countries. This shows how wrong, how weak and distorted the argument accusing Israel of colonialism is. When a poor Russian Jew who survived the pogroms comes to Israel, he is a symbol of white colonialism, and when Jews migrate from Yemen in the same year for the same reason, they are completely ignored. In 1947, there were pogroms against Jews in Aden. About 100 Jews were killed, and nobody was held accountable. A year later, 2 Muslim girls drowned in a well in Yemen, and the Jews were blamed. They were arrested and ordered to pay substantial fines. They lived in constant fear and suffered immensely. From 1949 to 1950, all of the Yemenite Jews, about 50,000 people, migrated to Israel. Golda Meir wrote in her memoir, "Sometimes I drove to the airport to meet the Jews as they landed from Yemen. Once I asked an elderly man, 'Have you ever seen an airplane in your life?' And he said, 'No.' And then I asked, 'Weren't you afraid to fly?' And he said, 'No. As it says in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, you yourself have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself.' Today, there are no Jews in Yemen. The Jews in Iran have a very long history going back 2,500 years. Although today Iran is the main root of evil in the Middle East, I must say that of the supporters I have in Muslim countries, most of them are from Iran. I hope that the good people of Iran will bring down the cruel Islamic regime. I'm not going to try to summarize the history of Jews in Iran, but there is one short story about the Jews of the city of Mashhad. In 1839, many years before the advent of the Zionist movement, there was a blood libel against the Jews. 30 Jews were killed and a few girls were abducted to become Muslim child brides. The community was forced to convert to Islam. For more than 100 years, the Jews kept their identity a secret. They were known in Mashhad as the new Muslims and continued to suffer at the hands of their Muslim neighbors. The converted Jews had to open their shops on Saturday to prove that they didn't observe the Shabbat, the Jewish day of rest. So despite opening the doors of their shop, they did their best not to sell anything to the customers. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, they all fled to Israel. There are no more Jews in Mashhad. And let me remind you that I'm talking about the 1950s, before having feelings was invented. The fact that in the 1940s there were 220,000 Jews in Morocco and today there are 2,000 does not suggest that they were having such a great time there. There were pogroms against Jews in Taza in 1903, in Casablanca in 1907, in Setat in 1907, the Tritel, the Fez riots of 1912. Each pogrom saw dozens of Jews killed, women subjected to the R-word, girls kidnapped, synagogue burned to the ground, and private Jewish property plundered. In each instance, it wasn't just one crazy guy that did it. Thousands of Moroccan Muslims were active in the anti-Jewish pogroms. The Jews in Morocco, like all the Jews in all Muslim countries, had to pay the jizya. This is a tax paid by non-Muslim subjects, Jews and Christians who are living in an Islamic state. Many more rules were imposed in a bid to humiliate the Jews. From the 15th century on, Jews had to live in Jewish ghettos called El Malech, and they were not allowed to go out at night. In 1834, Sol Hajuel, a 17-year-old Jewish girl, was publicly executed in the city of Fez after her neighbors falsely claimed she had converted to Islam. When Sol said she was still Jewish, she was accused of apostasy, of converting to Islam and then denouncing it. In Muslim countries, you were not allowed to convert from Islam to other religions. She was offered money and a good life if she would live as a Muslim girl, but she insisted on remaining Jewish. She said that she was born a Jew and she would die as a Jew. I said at the start that Jews from Yemen came to the land of Israel in 1882. If you know the history of Tel Aviv, you will know that the founders, the first families that bought up land north of Jaffa, were Jewish families from North Africa, Shlush, Amzaleg, Abulafia, and that all happened 30 years before the Zionist Congress. There is so much to say about this topic, but we don't really have enough time to go into it all here. The main goal of this video was to talk about the real ethnic cleansing that was going on in the 1940s, the one carried out by the Muslims against the Jews, the one that no one talks about. Huge communities were wiped out by means of pogroms, riots, and a lot of brutality. Unlike the Palestinians who started a war against the Jews and lost, the Jews living in Muslim countries never used violence against their Muslim neighbors.
And right after that, in the Spanish Inquisition, they had to leave Spain in 1492.
Okay.
And the Ottomans, welcomed them, right?
Thank you
Muslim
very much.
Empire. They came to these very lands, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? It's so amazing that you mentioned that when the Jewish people had to leave Spain in 1492 after the Catholics, two monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, united by marriage, the rulers of Castile and Aragon, they took the last stronghold of Islam and Muslims in Spain called Granada. And as a result, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people were either killed or banished. Those who could escape with their lives and their families, where did they go? Did they go to Christian Europe? Absolutely not. They came to the Muslim lands. They came to the Ottomans. For example, Rabbi Yitzhak Sarfati, writing in 1420, the Ottoman period, okay? Your Christ, talking to his German brethren, German Jews living in Germany at the time, your cries and laments have reached us, and we have been told of all the sorrows and persecutions which you suffer in German lands. Listen, my brothers. This is a rabbi writing to his Jewish brothers and sisters in Germany, and he's writing from Ottoman territories. He says to them, listen, my brothers, if you knew even the tenth of what God has blessed us with in this land, you would give heed to no further difficulties. You would embark at once to us. Here the Jew is not compelled to wear a yellow hat as a badge of shame. You will be free of your enemies. Here you will find peace in the Ottoman territories.